They're wet, they're soggy, they're mushy, but don't let that fool you. Canada's peatlands play a major role in fighting climate change. These areas hold billions of tons of carbon, but new research warns they remain largely unprotected and increasingly threatened by development. For more on what's at stake, I'm joined from Edmonton by Lorna Harris, the Director of Forest, Peatlands and Climate Change at the Wildlife Conservation Society of Canada. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
So what makes peatlands so effective at combating climate change?
Well, peatlands are freshwater wetlands. They're important carbon stores. They're important habitat for many different species. But what sets them apart from other wetlands is their ability to capture carbon from the atmosphere and to store that carbon in very wet and deep peat soils for many thousands of years.
Let's talk numbers, because the UN Environment Program estimates as much as 600 billion tons of carbon is stored in peatlands globally. Only 17% of those areas are protected, only 17%. So for the lands that are not protected, what are the threats that face those areas?
Yeah, so in Canada, we've got a quarter of the world's peatlands, so we have a disproportionate responsibility to protect these areas. A huge threat to these peatlands is actually mining development, and particularly for critical minerals across the country. If we think about how much carbon is stored in peatlands in Canada, it's around 150 billion tons of carbon. If only 5% of that is disturbed, that's around 28 billion tons of carbon dioxide. That's around 36 times Canada's annual greenhouse gas emissions.
Whoa, I mean, those are huge numbers. You mentioned this, about a quarter of the world's peatlands are here in our country. This new report we're talking about warns that we lack the geographical data related to those areas. What does that mean, and what does that mean for going forward?
Yeah, we don't have very good maps for a lot of the peatlands globally. We're still discovering many peatland areas across the world, but in Canada, a lot of our peatlands are very remote. In northern regions, we have some of the last remaining intact peatland landscapes in Canada. We've got some of the largest peatland landscapes in Canada, including the second largest peatland complex in the world, the Hudson Bay Lowland. But mapping these landscapes is very challenging.
Ontario's Ring of Fire region, where peatlands are prevalent, is also becoming, you mentioned this, a major target for development for mining companies because of, the large presence of critical minerals. What kind of scale of development are we seeing, and what have we seen so far?
Just in the Ring of Fire alone, there's around 5,000 square kilometers of mining claims. We did an estimate of how much carbon could be impacted, how much carbon in the peatlands could be impacted a few years ago. That's around 250 million tons of carbon stored within those peatlands. That's a very large amount of carbon that could be at risk from those developments, and that's just one part of Canada.
Canada is facing increased pressure to leverage its resources to boost the economy, as the U.S. is threatening these new tariffs. So, Lorna, how do we balance the need to develop these areas with the protections that they need?
Yeah, so first of all, we need to increase protected areas across Canada and to include peatland landscapes within those protected areas. We need to increase support for Indigenous stewardship of all of these lands. And we also need to increase the law and policy relevant to peatlands across Canada. We've currently got very weak protections for peatlands in our law and policy. And we have no coordinated plan, no strategy for peatlands in this country, despite having a quarter of the world's peatlands. So we need to better protect those areas so we can make climate smart decisions for any development that does need to go ahead. We need to be very careful about that and consider the carbon impacts.
Well, Lorna, thanks for having this conversation with us this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
If you like that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.